Welcome to Nintendo Historia. I'm your host, Chris Tysis, and this is part of Nintendo Ninja News. So, we've been doing history on Nintendo accessory items and things like that. However, I think it's time to go back to their origins, all the way back to 1889, where the company was made. However, we need to go a few more hundreds of years ago to get a bit of a picture of the environment that Nintendo was created into. So you see, in 1549, a missionary named Francis Xavier came to Japan, and with all the different things that the Western world provided to Japan, they had playing cards. And people in Japan snapped up the idea that we'll be using playing cards, and of course, with that type of environment, you get illegal gambling. So, about 100 years later or so, in 1633, they decided to ban foreign playing cards and pretty much anything that was an influence from the Western world. So, Japan closed the borders and playing cards are now banned. Over that time and over the next couple hundred years, they kept on making new type of cards and new type of games. But as soon as they got popular, they got banned as well, which did not help the general public or local criminal gangs. Well, it came to the Meiji government, who decided to legalize Hanafuda cards. Now, I know that my pronunciation is not correct, sadly, but we're getting there. So, these type of cards had pictures instead of numbers, which allowed them to be legalized and to be used as playing cards. They thought that they were not going to be as harmful as the traditional playing cards that we all know and love. Well, that didn't quite work out too well. So, we've got this environment where these type of cards are legal to play, and we can do it like that. However, gambling was still illegal, and these type of cards were allowed to be played. In came Nintendo. The young man known as Fusajina, which is probably another tough pronunciation, Hamachi, we'll say Hamachi the First, because he's a line of family members who ran Nintendo up to Satoru Iwata, who was the previous CEO during the video game era. Now, he came into the picture because he was a fan of this particular card-playing game, and he wanted to make these cards, and he was an artist. He was sort of a graphics artist. So he decided to put together these cards to sell. So he sold off these cards, and Nintendo were a little bit slow to get off during that time and period, which made things a little bit difficult. So, however, the criminal gang, the Yakuza criminal gangs in Japan started to use Nintendo's cards as a way of gambling and to make money, which was very, very interesting. So, it created this environment that Nintendo did. There was a hole in the market for playing cards, and Nintendo filled it, which is very, very cool. Now, it took a while for Nintendo for these type of cards to be produced, and that was a bit of an issue for them. They were trying to figure out a way of getting profits and sales and trying to make Nintendo a good company for himself. So, they decided to make a cheaper version of the Hanafuda cards, and they were called Tenga cards. Now, that is spelled Tenga. Now, they were cheaper, and they were easy to produce, and the cost was lower to use. And that was the thing that got them snapped up in that area. So the cards were starting to sell. Nintendo was doing well in the first 10, 20, 30 years. And the profits grew, and they were really the first company that made these beautiful artwork cards, which are great. And we will actually put some sort of links and things up above me for you to actually look at some of these websites that look nice, that will show off these cards. Now, here's the interesting thing about Nintendo's little history. Now, the Tenga cards is based on a mythical creature who had a long nose. I have a bit of a long nose myself. Now, what would the long nose actually mean? What that would mean when it came to those playing cards that they were selling? Now, you see, if you were going to Osaka or Kyoto in these gaming dens and you wanted to gamble, you would give the slight message of rubbing your nose. And that would tell people that you were here to gamble. And these cards just happen to be named after a mythical creature with a long nose. So there's a connection there. And the message is, and what people believe in, is that Nintendo made these cards purely for illegal gambling. They knew there was a market. They knew their cards were being bought by criminal gangs, and that's what Nintendo did. And there was money to be made, and they made a lot of money. Now, things are setting up well. Things are going well, and of course, this probably would have been happening for the first few decades of the company's lifetime, which is fantastic. So the question is, and we move on to, is what is the meaning of the Nintendo name? Well, of course, most people think that the meaning of the Nintendo name is leave like to heaven. Now, Hiroshima Yamahachi, which is the third CEO or person in charge of Nintendo, said that's plausible that it could mean that. But let's have a little look into their origins in history and pull apart the actual name. So the Nin, N-I-N, was a reference to the Tengen mythical creature, to the cards. And also the Ten, which is the middle of the name Nintendo, which is T-E-N, is also a reference to that mythical creature, which in turn was based on the cards that we're making for gambling. So, now the do, the end of it, Nintendo, which is do, means shrine or sanctuary. Now, normally that was added to sort of company business names to add prestige in those times and periods. And that was very interesting. So there's a few theories about what the name of Nintendo could actually mean. And it could mean that the temple of the free Hanafuda cards, dropping the cards from that actual line, or the company that is allowed to make Hanafuda, which is very interesting, isn't it? Now, the current Yakuza criminal gangs, we'll just say that the underground criminal gangs, as there are in all different countries, believe Nintendo made the cards for gambling. That was essentially the reason why they did it. It wasn't really for families to play the game and things like that, because they knew a lot of the buyers were there. An interesting thing, Yokai, the man who created the Game Boy and the Ultra Hand toy back in the 70s, talked about during the 1960s that he was the person that was checking on the machines that would make the cards, and he noticed that local mafia would turn up to them if they bought faulty cards meaning that they probably lost hundreds of dollars in bets and gambling games, and they got very angry at the Nintendo company for supplying faulty cards. So, after looking at all this history of the cards that they made and the history, the sort of dark sort of history, it's really interesting to look at how Nintendo's beginnings is not as sweet as innocent as the company today makes it out to believe, that they were just a simple card making company. And I think that's the coolest part about it, is the early beginnings. And this sort of stuff covered the first 40, 50 years of them making cards and producing good products that made money for them. And it's a very, very cool sort of history to look into. And I think this was one of the main reasons why I wanted to talk about Nintendo's history. But despite their playing card game days, they still make cards. They still make very cool cards. So I think we're going to bring that to a wrap for our history lesson for today. And who knows where the next chapter will be in terms of Nintendo's history. But I guess you'll find out soon and later on. So that's it from me, and I'll see you later on.